Are we poisoning our children?
Children very often serve as the kind of canaries in the coal mine.
A report on the search for everyday chemicals that may be harming our kids.
To me, as a medical detective, the first clue is the increase in the incidence of childhood cancer. That signals that something is going wrong.
Children have home and garden pesticides in their urine, and they're peeing out wood preservatives. Women have termite poisons and toilet deodorizers and flame retardants in their breast milk.
Just about everybody in my family has asthma. It's nothing scarier to a parent, the kid not being able to breathe.
What if you could have protected your child from something and you didn't?
We are bringing new laboratory technology to this that we've never used before.
It's like fingerprints at the scene of a crime.
From our studios in New York, Bill Moyers.
Welcome to Now. We're devoting our entire broadcast tonight to one important question. Are everyday chemicals harming our kids? In my lifetime, more than 75,000 synthetic chemicals and metals have been put to use in America. Chemicals that in many cases make our lives easier and better. They kill insects and weeds, clean our clothes and carpets, unclog our drains, create produce and lawns pretty as a picture. But most of those chemicals have never been tested for their toxic effects on children. And scientists are concerned now that recent increases in childhood illnesses like asthma and cancer, as well as learning disabilities, may be related to the environment, to what kids eat, drink, and breathe. With 4 grandchildren, I'm grateful for the scientists who are trying to answer these questions. You'll meet some of them in this report. All of us have a stake in their scientific exploration of kids and chemicals.
There's a mystery unfolding in Fallon, Nevada.
Are you Corinza?
A medical mystery. Investigators are searching homes for traces of a potential killer. No one knows what it looks like. It left no visible tracks. But somehow, it crossed the path of 5-year-old Serena Rivers. She's in remission now. But 2 years ago, she was the 4th child in town to be diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia.
Not long after that, another child was diagnosed, and at the time I just thought how awful for that family to be going through what we were going through.
Careful!
And then I found out that another child had leukemia. It was just one after the other, and I thought, what's going on here?
When the 5th child fell ill, Nevada's top health officials decided to investigate. Dr. Randy Todd and Dr. Mary Guinan.
The cases kept coming in an alarming manner, almost like a communicable disease. Dr. Todd and I would look at each other and say, it can't be true. We have another case.
In 20 years, this county of 24,000 people had recorded only 1 case of childhood leukemia. Now, in 5 years, they've had 15, what experts call a cancer cluster.
I think it's human nature to ask and human nature to think. There are so many cases, there must be something to this.
Is there something in this high desert valley making children sick? Could it be pesticides from the fields? High levels of naturally occurring arsenic in the water? Atomic testing from the 1960s? Or is it benzene from the jet fuel used at the nearby airbase? No one could say. So everything in the environment was suspect.
I'd drive around town, I'd drive on the outskirts of town. I looked at every building, wondering what kind of chemicals they were using, wondering if they were spilling when they weren't supposed to be.
When you clean your home, do you have a cleaning service that comes in? Do you know what products they might use? Do you see them doing any aerial spraying or with
I've seen aerial spraying, but I haven't seen it in this field here.
Okay.
You could have a list of hundreds of environmental toxins, but the question is, how did it affect our community, and how did it affect it uniquely? if there is a toxin, if there is something in the environment, how did it specifically select these children?
It's rare to uncover the cause of a cancer cluster. Dr. Guinan did in the 1980s when she worked for the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. She helped link a cluster of cancers in gay men to the virus we now know as HIV. Dr. Guinan knew that Fallon's mystery required help from the best medical detectives in the country.
Clusters are the bane of the existence of health officers, and given the dramatic nature of this cluster, we felt this was an important one to respond to.
Dr. Richard Jackson runs the CDC's Environmental Health Division. His team hadn't taken on a cancer cluster in 20 years.
Environmental epidemiology, doing epidemic investigations of things in the environment, has been held back by the lack of good measures about what's in people. Robert, how are you? It's much more difficult than infectious disease epidemiology. Environmental exposures are often much lower, much more long-term. It's a different kind of investigation.
Investigators know they will find the most important clues hiding in the kids' bodies, if their tools can detect them.
I gotta do this one, huh?
Dustin Gross has successfully fought his leukemia with chemotherapy.
We will look for environmental toxins in the body, not have you been exposed to them, but how much of these toxins have been absorbed into the human body, in fact, into these human bodies. And nobody's ever done that in a cancer cluster before.
Blood and urine samples from the families in Fallon were brought to the CDC labs in Atlanta. They're being analyzed here for minute traces of chemical suspects, pesticides, metals, solvents, and PCBs, a class of persistent chemicals banned years ago.
I don't think there's ever been a cluster investigation before that looked at 125, 130 different chemicals in the blood and urine. Many labs measure what's in the air. Many labs look at what's in water. Some look at what's in food. But the ability to actually look at something in a human being is much more difficult.
Scientists have learned a lot about curing childhood leukemia with chemicals. Now they're undertaking the painstaking process of learning how or whether certain chemicals can cause the disease.
What we will find is clues and how to look at the next step. That's how science works. Science works in small steps. And then there's maybe an aha moment. But prior to that aha moment, there are years and years of systematic study. And that's what's so very difficult for people to understand about science.
Since the investigation began in Fallon, 2 children have died. Scientists might not find a link between their deaths and the community's environment. But the questions they're asking in this small town in Nevada are part of a bigger search unfolding across the country.
Mr. Phil.
I see the cluster of cases of childhood leukemia in Fallon as part of the broad increase in the incidence of various forms of childhood cancer in the United States, leukemia among them, an increase that has been going on for the past 25 or 30 years. So let's talk for a minute about leukemia rates in this country. And
Dr. Philip Landrigan is a pioneer in the emerging field of children's environmental health. From New York's Mount Sinai School of Medicine, he works with scientists around the country to understand how kids are affected by exposure to chemicals.
50 or 60 years ago in this country, the major diseases in children were the infectious diseases. Hi, good morning, how are you? I'm Dr. Landrigan. Today, the major causes of illness in kids are chronic diseases. She's not having too much trouble breathing now.
Much better than before.
Asthma is the leading cause of admission of children to hospital. It's the leading cause of school absenteeism. Thank you. Cancer, after injuries, is the leading killer of children in the United States. Developmental disabilities are common. They affect anywhere from 5 to 10% of all children. Things like attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, autism.
Do you think these changes in the patterns of illness have anything to do with the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink?
We know that chemicals in the environment are responsible for some of these effects. We know, for example, that some cases of developmental disability in children are caused by exposures to lead, to pesticides, to mercury, to PCBs. We suspect that children who are exposed to pesticides are at greater risk of childhood cancer than other children, but mostly we don't know. Of the 3,000 or so high production volume chemicals in use in this country today, only 43% have been even minimally tested. Only about 10% have been thoroughly tested to examine their potential effects on children's health and development.
So little testing has left scientists and policymakers in the dark about the toxicity of thousands of chemicals. This is changing, slowly. In 1996, the Food Quality Protection Act directed regulators to reevaluate more than 500 pesticides and set stricter standards for the protection of children.
Prior to 1996, all environmental regulation in this country was based on the notion that the entire population consisted of healthy young adults.
No one said children are different.
No, no.
To comply with the new law, scientists at the Environmental Protection Agency had to learn how kids and chemicals come into contact. They're gathering data from hundreds of children where traces of chemicals are routinely present. Homes, classrooms, playgrounds.
Okay, now do we know where the kids are spending their time? Not just on the tables, but around there. Are they actually going to be sitting or rolling in that area?
Dr. Linda Sheldon is the lead investigator.
What we're trying to understand is what chemicals they're exposed to, how much they are exposed to, and how that exposure occurs. Maybe just for some chemicals, food is the most important pathway. For other chemicals, just the air you breathe is the most important pathway.
Children are very different from adults. First of all, they're more heavily exposed pound for pound. They eat more food, they drink more water, they breathe more air. Then, of course, kids play on the ground. They live low. They put their hands in their mouths. And so they transfer more of any toxic chemicals into their body than we do.
Before we do this, does anyone have to go potty?
The scientists use special suits to gather chemicals that children pick up from surfaces in the room. They also measure what's on the surfaces. They're looking for tiny traces of 40 different persistent organic chemicals that may harm children, from PCBs and chemicals produced by burning fuels and chemicals used in plastics to a range of pesticides.
With pesticides, it appeared that the highest exposures for children would be both through pesticides getting on their skin and also what happens with this hand-to-mouth activity. Do pesticides go on their hand and into their mouth, or as they're sucking objects, sucking pacifiers, sucking anything in sight, are they bringing in pesticides to their body?
See, I wipe the fish down for you.
Many indoor pesticides were originally designed to be used outdoors.
I'll do the other side.
Once you bring them indoors, there's no sunlight, there's no rain. They tend to degrade more slowly. So, in fact, it's more important for us to understand them in that environment.
Pesticides can linger indoors for weeks, sometimes years. Particularly in carpets, they can reach concentrations 10 to 100 times higher than those found outside.
Many of the pesticides in common use, particularly members of the organophosphate family, were deliberately designed to be toxic to the nervous system. They kill insects by poisoning the nervous systems of the insects, and they have the same capability in humans.
Animal studies have led some scientists to believe that even minute exposures to certain pesticides can harm the developing brain, alter behavior, and diminish intelligence. Dr. Sheldon's team continues the search for traces of chemicals where children live and play. Comparing what children are exposed to in their environment to what shows up in their urine will help researchers to know what precautions to recommend. But exposure is only one piece of the puzzle. a critical question remains. What do combinations of these chemicals at low levels actually do to children? Here in New York City, the effort to answer that question begins in the womb. More than 500 expectant mothers will pull on backpacks like these in their third trimester. Inside are devices that trap the chemicals in the air they breathe. Children in New York City are exposed to an urban soup of airborne chemicals. Some neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan suffer more than others.
We are inundated with diesel trucks and buses. Out of the 7 depots here in Manhattan, 6 are on Harlem and Washington Heights. We've never been in compliance of clean air standards.
Peggy Shepard has campaigned for 15 years to clean up the sources of air pollution in these neighborhoods, from sewage treatment plants to diesel engines. She thinks research will help.
New York City is rated number 2 in air toxics by the EPA, just after Baltimore. And we'd like to know, what is the cumulative impact of all of these sources?
You want me to put Tal in the swing and get her a push once she her angel?
What's already known is that these neighborhoods have some of the highest rates of asthma in the country. Aisha Hamilton Odom, 8 months pregnant, is taking part in this groundbreaking study at Columbia's Center for Children's Environmental Health.
Just about everybody in my family has asthma. One of my aunts was hospitalized twice this summer, for her asthma. My mother has asthma. I have asthma. Little Leon has asthma. And hopefully, my baby won't have it, but the odds.
A child's genes do increase the odds, but they're not the whole story.
We've basically dropped the ball as a research community, maybe as a country. We have a very serious lack of understanding of how to go about preventing these diseases because we haven't had enough information.
At night, of course, she's going to hang it by the bed.
Dr. Frederica Pereira is the study's director. She and her team are looking for links between chemicals in the air and the risk of asthma, cancer, or learning disabilities. Jessica Dietrich's assignment is to find out how the expectant mothers, none of whom smoke, are exposed to chemicals throughout their pregnancy.
Good. How you doing? Good. How are you?
Tiffany Crafton has no history of asthma in her family. She's expecting her 3rd child.
We can't wait until individuals are born to know that there's been some damage.
Let me just write down your due date while I have it.
We know developing fetus and young child are particularly sensitive to a variety of toxic chemicals. So it's very important for us to learn about the effects of low-level, combined, real-life exposures.
I want you to think about your entire pregnancy from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been exposed to any paint or paint products?
No.
Okay. Have you ever been exposed to carbon black from copying or printing machines?
Yeah.
You have?
I have.
Okay.
I made copies for 2 weeks.
During your pregnancy?
Yeah.
You're doing this in a very urban area. Would a study like this have relevance to mothers in the suburbs or rural America?
Yes, absolutely. Because the exposures we're studying are not unique to these communities. They're not unique at all. They're very widespread, in fact, pervasive.
So every day when you would go into work, you'd walk through a bunch of people smoking.
We are focusing on those so-called involuntary exposures, things that we don't have control over, because we haven't had enough information about their early effects. And yet we know from experimental studies and from some human data, albeit generally limited, that these exposures do have the potential to harm the health of developing child.
All right, so basically it's sucking in air through here. This is what we'll analyze later
So it's like
on.
everything I'm breathing?
Everything that's in the air you breathe will be
Okay.
trapped in here.
Okay.
So this will give us an idea of what types of pollution you are exposed to in your daily life during your pregnancy, and also that the baby is exposed to. Okay. Does it feel all right? Do you want me to tighten it, or it's comfortable?
Yeah, how it look?
All right, it looks great. Very stylish.
You don't mind? Huh?
Ring around the
Careful,
It makes me more aware because now I'm noticing different smells. Like I've noticed when we were in the building, the lady was smoking, and I walked by and I was like, that's gonna take in the smoke. And it's like outside now, I can smell, you know, the stuff on the bus or whatever that I really never noticed before.
Hi, Aisha. How are you? I'm fine. You got the backpack on.
Each woman returns the backpack after 48 hours.
Thank you very much.
They got to suck up some of the fumes from the trucks coming from the armory. And
The air samples are full of clues. So far, they reveal every woman has been exposed to carcinogens that come from burning fuels. They're also searching for passive cigarette smoke and neurotoxic pesticides. Other culprits may be clinging to the dust in Aisha's home, like allergens from mice or roach droppings.
We don't know much about how common pollutants may interact with allergens to cause asthma, and this study gives the investigators a unique opportunity to do that.
If all goes well, their diligence will pay off with an understanding of which pollutants are getting through to the baby.
I'm just going to put these stickers so when you go to the hospital, they'll know that you're a part of the study.
What have we learned about the fetus? Is it truly susceptible to these invaders?
Yes, the fetus does not have the same mature defense mechanisms that adults have. And their systems and organs are developing very rapidly, so they're more vulnerable.
Scientists already know certain chemicals can cross the placenta and reach the developing fetus. They believe these exposures might be having an impact.
Exposure alone doesn't mean a child will get sick, does it?
Oh no, exposure alone is just exposure. What matters is how intense is the exposure and when it occurs in the course of a child's development.
The amount and the timing.
That's right. If the child's exposure occurs at a critical window in early development, even a relatively small exposure can have devastating long-term consequences.
Such devastating consequences hit the world like a bomb 40 years ago. In Europe, a prescription drug called thalidomide was being given to expectant mothers to fight morning sickness. What the doctors didn't know was that a mother's nausea coincided with a crucial period in limb formation.
Children were born without arms and legs. Children were born with problems with their ears and their eyes. All kinds of things that were obvious right in the delivery room when these children were born. There may be no safe threshold levels at certain key windows of vulnerability.
Dr. Sandra Steingraber, a biologist, has written and lectured widely about the effects of chemicals on the developing fetus.
What we realized was it wasn't so much how many pills you took that determined the extent of the damage in the child. It's on which day you took the pills. So if you took a pill on day 35 or 36 of your pregnancy, you had one kind of damage. If you took the same dose on day 40 or 45, you had another set of physical malformations in the child. It all depended on what body part was getting set up on that day of development.
We've learned that if a child is exposed to a chemical like lead or a pesticide during one of those critical early windows, that there can result toxic effects which are absolutely unique and absolutely devastating, effects that have no counterpart if an older child or an adult is exposed to the same chemical.
Very early on in pregnancy, for example, a toxic exposure that occurs during that point where the fertilized egg is just getting itself implanted and setting up its life support system inside the uterus, that's a window of vulnerability for miscarriage.
Between weeks 5 and 10, organs and limbs are forming.
So a chemical that earlier on might have created a miscarriage, if it's introduced during that period of time, might create a risk for a birth defect. Cleft palate, hole in the heart, fingers or toes are shortened or missing.
In the 5th month, the brain undergoes a period of rapid growth.
If a toxic chemical, especially a neurotoxin, is introduced during that point in the 2nd trimester, you can actually paralyze migrating brain cells and distinguish human intelligence. And maybe, and here's where the science is really just beginning to emerge, maybe certain problems that we understand in the school systems as attention deficit disorders, hyperactivity, the inability to pay attention, aggressive and violent behaviors, might have their origins during those windows of vulnerability during pregnancy. And these are questions just being asked, data just beginning to come in.
Almost down. Come on, push Aisha. Give it a yes. Good push. Come on.
It's been a month since Aisha Hamilton Odom took off her backpack air monitor.
6, 7, 8.
Push. Come on.
What a beautiful baby. Aisha. Oh my God. Oh, it's a girl.
Oh, yay. Is she making her push? She's crying. Oh my God, that's my baby. Look.
Already there's evidence none of these babies enter the world untouched by chemicals. The clues show up in the umbilical cord blood. It's difficult to collect even a small amount. The blood is both light sensitive and time sensitive. It must be carried off immediately for processing in a darkened lab. So you are looking here in this blood for the evidence that a child has been exposed to chemicals.
That's right. The blood samples are processed and analyzed here. And this is Dr. Delian Tang from Moyers.
Hello, how are you? And I'll shake hands with you because
that's right. The blood is spun into separate components in a centrifuge.
See, here the top is the plasma. The bottom red is the red blood cell. In between, there's a very thin layer.
I see it.
That's white blood cell.
A very, very tiny layer of white blood cells.
Yeah, that's where the DNA is.
In the white blood cells?
In the white blood cells. Then we're going to take the white blood cells, extraction the DNA. And I'll show you a DNA.
Okay, good. I have never seen DNA before. That's it? Oh, yes.
That white, milky substance?
That's what they call the stuff of life,
That's
right?
the stuff of life. That's
all
the stuff
the information is in there.
But it is on this milky-looking fluid there, this DNA, that you will hope to find the fingerprints of the chemicals that you're looking for.
That's right. There's a lot of monitoring of exposure, but that's not enough. We really need to know how much that individual has actually absorbed of a particular chemical, and whether there has been damage to key targets like DNA or the immune system. It's like fingerprints, almost at the scene of a crime.
This machine detects chemicals in DNA. The chemical fingerprint will show up as a peak in the DNA analysis.
We only interest this peak.
This one right here.
That's the benzpyrene.
That's this peak representing amount of ADA the baby has.
The adduct is ADDUCT. It's not a word I was familiar with.
No, an adduct is where the chemical is actually hooked on to DNA.
This is a model of benzopyrene, a chemical formed by burning fuels. When benzopyrene crosses the placenta, it makes its way into the fetus, into the cell, and can bind itself to the DNA, forming the adduct. This is undeniable proof the chemical has been there and damaged the baby's DNA. That's the fingerprint you're talking about.
That's the fingerprint. And if this adduct is not repaired properly, a mutation, a change in the coding sequence can result. And if other things happen down the road, that cell can become a cancer cell.
6 out of 10 of these babies have measurable adducts. Earlier work by Dr. Pereira determined that the greater the number of adducts, the greater the risk for cancer.
And that's the missing link in all this. We know the exposures are happening often. We know the cancers are happening. But being able to then trace the cause and effect link between the exposure and the biological damage that exposure does inside the body, and then being able to say that that's the kind of damage that we know contributes to tumor formation, That's the link we're beginning to fill in, and that's what's so exciting, I think, about the new science.
Dr. Pereira's team at Columbia is halfway through the study.
The advisors kept saying to me, what a rich body of data we have accumulated on this cohort.
The researchers have already observed that up to half of the babies are sensitized to mice or roach allergens in the womb, and 1 of 4 babies is at high risk for asthma by age 1. Unfortunately, the chemicals that control these pests are also a problem. Dr. Robin White studies the mother's exposure to pesticides.
There was a study done in 1997 that indicated, in fact, the major use of pesticides in New York State is not occurring in the agricultural communities, but is occurring in the boroughs of Manhattan and Brooklyn. So we've been monitoring for 8 different pesticides, and we've so far completed that for 166 women, and all of those women are exposed to at least 3 pesticides, and 30% of the women have been exposed to all 8.
And the cord blood samples reveal the babies have absorbed the same pesticide compounds as their mothers.
There is some data from laboratory animals that have shown that if you give these exposures while the mother is pregnant, it causes a lot of learning disabilities in the offspring. So the question is, are these effects happening in humans? And that's what we're trying to find out.
So let's get started with the questionnaire.
At 6 months, the child comes in for testing, again at 12 months, and again at 2 and 3 years, and we hope to repeat that on into the successive years.
¿Y qué es eso? Caballo. Un caballo, pero es un mulo.
And we measure the child's cognitive development.
Where's the other one? El otro, ¿dónde está? Okay.
And also motor function.
And what are you seeing?
Well, so far I can't give the actual results at this time, but many of the children do seem to have some either mild or severe developmental delay.
We're going to hide the bunny under this cup.
It is still too early to draw conclusions. Dr. Pereira and her team will not yet declare a link between certain pesticides and a child's ability to learn. But a great deal rides on tests like these.
Great, thank you very much.
The team is not waiting to educate the participants in their study. They've called on community activist Peggy Shepard to help them reduce exposure to chemicals in the neighborhood.
What can research in a community like this do that science alone in a lab can't do?
Well, you know, scientists are good at producing data and coming out with some results. It's organizations and community residents who, if working with them, can take that data and advocate and take action, change policy, change conditions.
Are we making progress? Are we going to have 10 years from now, 20 years from now, a healthier, cleaner environment in which children are safer?
You know, I think it can happen. There are many committed people, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a tremendous amount of hard work and stamina and some real struggles.
Scientists know from experience just how long and hard the struggle can be. They learn that lesson in the battle to protect children from exposure to a single chemical, lead. Lead paint's capacity to harm children has been documented for more than 100 years. No toxic chemical has been studied as thoroughly. But even today, lead remains the #1 environmental threat to children's health.
Out of the 50 schools we examined, 17 of them tested positive for lead.
Just last year, a news investigation in Los Angeles showed children were being exposed to lead contamination in their local elementary school.
Watch as this little boy puts both of his hands on the contaminated windowsill. He brushes off what appears to be a paint chip. Seconds later, his right hand goes into his mouth.
Lead can leave its mark on a child's brain even before there are obvious symptoms.
Lead is an unusual metal in that it has no function in the body. It's never been shown to have any use at all in the body.
Dr. Herbert Needleman is a psychiatrist at the University of Pittsburgh.
23 years ago, working at Children's Hospital in Boston, he revolutionized the way scientists think about exposure to low levels of toxic chemicals.
It was acknowledged that a lot of lead can make you retarded. And my question was, would a little lead make you dumb? You know, it just reduces to that.
In the late 1970s, Dr. Needleman studied the baby teeth of healthy school children in 2 Boston suburbs.
Instead of blood, we used the tooth because the tooth is a long-term storage measure. We collected 3,000 teeth from 2,500 children, and we brought the children with the highest tooth lead levels and the lowest tooth lead levels into our laboratory, measured a lot of other things. I gave the mother an IQ test. And when we looked at the data, we found that children who had high lead in their teeth, but who had never been identified as having any problems with lead, had lower IQ scores, poor language function, and poor attention.
It was a stunning discovery.